Well, hello. Can you guys hear me in the back? Test, test. There we go. Okay. Well, thank you all for making time to come and be a part of CruiserFest today. My name's Greg Miller, and I'm the founder of the Land Cruiser Heritage Museum. And I thought I'd just take a couple of minutes before Jonathan takes the stage and share a couple of thoughts with you. The first thing I'd like to do is thank a few people and organizations that have made this whole project and this event possible. First of all, I'd like to thank all of you for your support, not just of this, but of the Land Cruiser community, and your enthusiasm is what keeps kind of the wheel of the Land Cruiser community turning, and so thank you for that. And I love that there are so many kids here. That's one of my favorite things is having the next generation introduced to Land Cruisers, and hopefully they'll have a little spark of enthusiasm, and then they'll do their part when we're all too old to do it. So I'd like to thank the Land Cruiser Heritage Museum staff, David Wakay, our executive director, Cruiser Dan Busey, and my son Oakley, who works here part-time and does a lot of special projects for us. They've done a great job getting the show floor ready. And when I walked in last night, I was surprised, kind of blown away. Those of you that have kids know if you're not around them for sometimes as little as a week, you see them and it's like, wow, when did you grow that big? I had that experience last night when I walked in after they'd all been working to get ready for CruiserFest. So I'd also like to thank our presenters, in particular Jonathan Ward, who's with TLC 4x4 and Icon. Many of you are familiar with his work, and we're in for a real treat in a few minutes when he addresses us. I've been a fan of his craftsmanship for as long as I've been aware of it, and I'm eager to hear from him today. I'd also like to thank Wasatch Cruisers and Brian Meenan for looking after the goings-on in the back lot today. I hope you guys, all of you who are members of Wasatch Cruisers, feel welcome here and know how much we value our relationship with you as the local chapter of the Land Cruiser Club. Also, yesterday, and I'll talk more about this in a minute, but yesterday in this very room we had our first board of directors meeting, and that's kind of an emotional thing for me, which I'll elaborate on when I'm done thanking people. But I'd like to thank those who are on the board, including my wife Heidi, my son Oakley, and then Kurt Williams, Scott Smith, and Nate Morley. I'd also like to thank Toby Warner and her family for all that they do to make my life run smoothly all the time, but in particular here with CruiserFest. And also Sarah Shirk, Dan Busey's wife, who's overseeing a lot of the kids' activities here today. And our sponsors, ABC Contractors, Cruiser Outfitters, Wasatch Cruisers, Land Cruisers Direct, and DocuMart. They've all made significant contributions to this event, and without that, it probably wouldn't happen. And last but not least, to my family and my awesome wife, Heidi. Heidi, are you here? I just saw you leaning against the door. Did you get out? Anyway, Heidi, stand up. She's most of you can relate to what I mean when I say if I didn't have her support in all of this, it wouldn't happen. And so I feel like I owe a lot of gratitude to her. So with the appreciations behind us, I wanted to take this opportunity to share some thoughts regarding the evolution of the museum, and just make you all aware of it. This is really important to me. It's really emotional to me, and I hope that it gives you some context about how this all came together and what the future of the museum is. But many of you have heard me tell the story of my first memory of a Land Cruiser, which took place in about 1970 in Lakewood, Colorado, at the old Stevenson Toyota dealership, when my dad was the parts manager there, and I went to work with my dad one day, and while he was putting parts away or pulling orders, I got bored and wandered out to the back lot, and I found this really cool Jeep-looking thing. It was powder blue, and it had a silver handle on it, and I reached up, and it hit me about eye level, and I pulled on it, and the door opened, and I climbed up in there, and I remember standing on the seat, pretending like I was driving this thing. And you can probably all relate to what I'm about to describe with that intoxicating smell of rust and dirt and oil and naugahyde. It's just that glorious, intoxicating smell of an FJ40. And so that was my earliest memory of a Land Cruiser. And there are literally hundreds, perhaps thousands of experiences that I've had from that moment until now that involve a Land Cruiser. But in 1985, I bought my first Land Cruiser. So we skipped from 1970 to 1985. And I bought my first Land Cruiser, which was a 1970 factory soft top. It was green. I don't know what color green. I would call it Kelly green. It had a black top. And I actually got hit when I was demo driving it. It was for sale in the newspaper. I met the guy at the mall, and as we were pulling out of the mall, a guy kind of clipped the corner and bent it, but it didn't really change the complexion of the Land Cruiser that much, so I went ahead and bought it anyway. And since then, I've bought and sold too many Land Cruisers to count. But one that's significant was in about 2002. My friends at Carl Malone Toyota were trying to make a car deal, and they called me one day and said, "Hey, we got this really cute FJ40 for sale. Would you be interested in giving us a bid on it?" And so I ran down and looked at it and wound up buying it. And that car is actually at another storage location, but that I still have that car. And so that car is the Land Cruiser that we've owned longer than any other Land Cruiser under this roof. And so my kids have dubbed it Senior. And Senior is really special in our family because I have 6 kids, and my 4 youngest kids all learned how to drive in that car, and including my youngest daughter and my 3 sons. And so I've threatened to sell it many times over the years, and it hasn't gone well in our family conversations, and the kids have so far prevailed, and we'll probably never sell that car. It's a pretty tired, ratty old FJ40, but it means a lot to my kids. Since then, I've acquired a lot of other Land Cruisers. Then on September 1st, 2008, that was Labor Day weekend, about, I guess, 11 years ago, I was with my kids and my father-in-law, and we went down to Moab to do Elephant Hill in an FJ40 and an FJ60 that we had. And while we were pulling into Moab, I saw this really cool crawler on the back of a Hino flatbed truck and pulling into the city market parking lot. And so we pulled in to get a look at it, and it was at that moment that I met Jeremiah Prophet. And I have a picture of that moment when I happened to take a picture of the car on the flatbed. My son Oakley and Jeremiah are both in the photo. They're not interacting. They hadn't even met yet, but they're both in the frame, and that's a really special photo for me. And when I met Jeremiah, I think that's when my curation of Land Cruisers really kicked into high gear. I call him a friend. Heidi calls him an enabler, but anyway, I remember a moment with Jeremiah when I was standing in his shop in Colorado, and we have that cruiser. It's the Lizard King, and it's at his shop having some upgrades done to it, so it's not here either. But looking at that and a 75 pickup and a half dozen other Land Cruisers, and I said, this is one of the things I love about Land Cruisers, is the diversity of them. They all have Land Cruiser DNA. Everything in front of us has Land Cruiser DNA, but they're all different, but they're all so lovable. And Jeremiah and I have had a lot of fun on various Land Cruiser projects along the way. Then on August 1st, 2009, we held our first CruiserFest at Miller Motorsports Park. Some of you were there for that. Then on December 12th through the 15th of 2011, I went to Japan with Scott Brady and my son Oakley to take delivery of 2 VDJ-79 Troopies that we were going to use for our Expedition 7 expedition, our global expedition. And that was a pivotal moment for me as well, because while we were there, we set aside some time to go to the Toyota museums, owned by Toyota, to see all the cool Land Cruisers that they had on display. And after hitting three museums and looking, when we walked every aisle of every floor of every museum, we saw exactly 0 Land Cruisers on display. One museum had a Willys Jeep, and another museum had a Willys Jeep, and there was a 60 parked in the employee parking behind one, but no Land Cruisers. And we all know what Land Cruiser has meant to Toyota over the years. It's how they've become a global brand by putting the Land Cruiser into a market first, and then when people understand the awesome quality, durability, reliability of Toyotas, then they'd bring the Toyopet or the Crown or other things, and that's how they built the brand. So I was really disappointed that Toyota didn't have any on display, and that's when the seeds were really planted about developing a museum. So then on November 1st, 2012, so almost a year later, I called Kurt Williams, and I said, "What are you doing tonight?" And he said, "I don't know. I guess I'm about to find out." And I said, "Well, I'm going to buy a Land Cruiser in the middle of Wyoming. Would you like to drive with me?" And he said, "Sure." And then we got in the car. We were driving up there, and I said, somehow the conversation led to him saying to me, "I always know when you call, it's going to include one or more of the following: late nights, long drives, and Land Cruisers." And in that case, it took all three. It combined all three. So we drove up and bought a BJ70, I think it was, soft top from Lee Bender. And it was on that drive that Kurt was working the keyboards on the Mac, and we began to establish a convention for what a Land Cruiser museum would look like. And I won't go into all that detail right now, but that was really the moment that the museum became formal. It became a thing. It became tangible. We had a target to shoot at. And so then so there was one other cool element of this. The first building my dad ever built when he became a businessman was at 5800 South State. It was Larry Miller Toyota, and it was basically a prefab building that had brick cladding. And as you come in, if you go west off State Street down to the back of the lot, the hill sloped down, and the back area was the service drive. It was 10,500 square feet, and it was red iron with just metal siding and some clear story, like fiberglass windows. And when we knocked that building down to make room for another dealership, I wanted to salvage that service department. So we took it apart and put it on a site out at Miller Motorsports Park, and that was the first home. That was where the ribbon cutting for the Land Cruiser Heritage Museum took place. That building still stands, even though we're no longer affiliated with what's now Utah Motorsports Campus. But that became the home of the Land Cruiser Heritage Museum, and that was where the 2016 Land Cruiser was unveiled, and Koyari-san was here to do that, so that was a special moment. Then in October of 2014, I made a deal to buy this building, and I began the remodel shortly thereafter of the space next door. This is what the whole thing looked like. This is actually a lot nicer than what it looked like when I bought it. And you can see next door's had some upgrades. And then on May 30th, Oakley's birthday, May 30th of 2015, we had a little moving party. And a lot of the people in this room were a part of that. And we brought probably 30 or 40 Land Cruisers from the former Miller Motorsports Park to this site. And then you can see that we're getting more and more formal all along. I hired an attorney to help me apply to the IRS to become a 501c3. And on September 23rd of 2015, we received our designation letter from the IRS declaring the Land Cruiser Heritage Museum a 501c3. And since that time, I have conveyed many of the Land Cruisers that were in my personal collection at the time to the foundation, and bought many additional Land Cruisers and conveyed them to the foundation as well. And that has been a bittersweet moment for me, and I'll come back to that. It's been a bittersweet experience for me, and I'll come back to that. I'll wrap up with that. On April 16th, 2016, after a 37-year career with the Larry H. Miller Group of Companies, Dan Busey retired and came here as our first official Land Cruiser Heritage Museum employee. Kyle Patton was here, but Kyle was with us in other capacities prior to the museum. And so Dan came here specifically to be at the museum. And then on January 28th of this year, David Wakay became the Land Cruiser Heritage Museum's first executive director. And as I said at the beginning, yesterday we had our first board meeting. That was the first required by the IRS board meeting of the Land Cruiser Heritage Museum Foundation. We have 3 family members and we have 3 independent members. And this all leads me to the point that I want to make, and I'm sorry, Jonathan, that I'm going to take just a couple minutes of your time. The museum has reached a point where it's no longer my personal collection. I've conveyed over 60 Land Cruisers to the foundation, and legally I no longer own them. Obviously, I'm still passionate about the museum and seeing it perpetuate, and that's what led to the foundation being created. And I would say that there's probably another 3 or 4 OEM model Land Cruisers that I'm going to probably spend the rest of my life looking for. They would be an AK-10, an FJ-24, a 35, all the unicorns we'd all love to have. If any of you ever get wind of those, please let me know. I will chase them down hard. But aside from those, the collection portion is largely behind us, and now my interest is in seeing the foundation outlive me from a governance standpoint and a financial standpoint. That's the governance standpoint is why the board is here, so that if I get hit by a bus on the way home, the board will understand my intent and they will be able to perpetuate the mission of the Land Cruiser Heritage Museum, which is to preserve and celebrate the history of the Land Cruiser and to inspire adventure. So I feel like we've got the governance component in place. The other part is the financial component, and one of the things that we need to do, it's one of our biggest initiatives, is to create an endowment that we can invest, and assuming that we're able to get even a little below average historical returns on a Dow index, we would be able to, if we hit our target, we'll be able to have enough earnings to cover the expenses of operating the museum. That won't give us enough money to buy the additional vehicles. We'll find another way to do that. But we are looking for, we're going to be coming up with ways that we can generate more revenue. And again, I want to make clear that this is a departure. So now this is not my collection. Anybody who would be inclined to support it isn't giving money to me. They're giving the money to a foundation in hopes that this can live on forever, even knowing that I won't. And so I would just encourage you to do what you can to help the Land Cruiser community make that shift, that this is an independent organization now, and it would be nice if we could all give just a little bit to perpetuate it as is appropriate. And I'm not here to make a pitch or an ask. I just want to inform you that much. So, so the hope is that when your kids and their kids want to learn about Land Cruisers 30, 40, 50 years or more from now, they can come here and see a really well-preserved collection of super awesome cars and feel that cruiser magic. So with that, I'll just close where I started by thanking you all for being here. And it's my pleasure now to introduce an awesome craftsman, one of the highest energy, most resourceful guys I've ever met. It's a real privilege to have him here because of how busy he is and everything he's got going on in his personal life. Jonathan Ward. Thank you.
Oh, good. There's chairs. Hi. Thanks for coming. If you guys don't know me in the probably the late 80s. But 1988. A big traveler. Anytime I had a spare dime and a spare day, I was in a backpack and out of here. And I had noticed the harsher the terrain, the more remote the locale, when a vehicle wasn't about what looks cool and it's about life or death, I was seeing FJ40s in every crevasse of this planet. And from that experience and towing plenty of Land Rovers out of trouble in FJ40s, sorry, it's an appropriate audience. I can get a Land Rover dig in there. I realized that the value, the engineering, the clarity in every bolt, like everything exists on the Land Cruisers for a reason. And like that clarity of purpose and the continuity in the design and the engineering just made a strong impression on me. So when I got back, I live in Los Angeles, got back home, always been a classic car geek, hardcore. Before I had a driver's license, I was restoring cars and driving them. But I wanted some for my dogs and surfing and camping and stuff. So I bought a horrible 74 FJ40 from like a corner Armenian car dealer lot in the valley. That was just a bucket of fiberglass and duct tape. It was just a train wreck. But I loved it. And being the geek that I am, of course, it ran fine. Everything was fine. But I started taking it apart and geeking out on it and putting it back together again. And at that time, it was weird because, I mean, we're anyone here into FJ40s back in the 80s and that time frame? So we were weirdos. And like no one was restoring them like you would a 65 Mustang or whatever, like a more typical classic car. And it just made no sense to me. So as a guy who had already restored dozens of cars, it was only logical to take it apart and restore it and put it back together. And around that time, I was realizing I really had zero interest in my day job. And I was starting to try and think, what the heck am I going to do? I'm going to get out of this. So I was taking night classes at USC, and I was taking a business class. And the professor was super cool. So we went out after the class, and we got into this big debate about supply and demand. And my thinking, obviously the teacher was telling us the typical supply and demand story, whereas my generational thinking, I was like, well, no, not anymore, because with this thing coming out called the intranet or whatever it is, and all these new abilities to communicate and reach people, like if you can control the supply, you can create the demand, and you can kind of flip that on its head. So they said I was an idiot, got into this heated debate, turned into a $1,000 bet. So I was given 3 months to drive a trackable market up 30 points. And I had some time, and I was eager for a road trip. So me and my old chocolate lab, Walter, hopped in my old FJ40, and we hit the road. And I bought every FJ40 worth a damn that I could find. I think I did the Pacific Northwest and then back down, went through Utah, Arizona, did Colorado, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, and then back up to LA. And I had a friend who was a trucker who had this decrepit old grasshopper-style 18-wheeler. And I would literally just with like a paper map, X spots of where I bought what and where things were. And then I'd wait a week and I'd call him. He'd come back behind me and sweep up all the cruisers and take them home. And because of my restoration habits, I had a friend with a body shop. I had another friend with a mechanic shop that were brilliant craftsmen, but crap businessmen. So I was trying to help them with just the business side structure. But suddenly I had 3 18-wheelers full of FJ40s coming to LA and no plan and no property in a one-car garage. And I already had the 10 cars clogging the streets in front of my house. And I bought my house when I was 17. And my neighbors were like in their 70s and already thought I was crazy. So there was no way they were going to let me put even one more car up there. So I started calling my 2 friends with the shop, said, hey, listen, I've been helping you guys out. I need somewhere to store these trucks. And I try to just keep it simple, which I should try and remember now that I've created the complex craziness that we're doing. just buy the best ones I could find, forensically take them apart, detail them, service them, turn them back around, and put them back on the market. And it was amazing. Like, suddenly, a lot of people that really appreciated the FJ40s, maybe from their own childhood experience or travel or whatever, they never bought them because they were only seeing pretty trampy ones and they didn't want to get into it. So just by cleaning them up and dialing them in a little bit, the market started realizing, oh, wait, those are cooler. I remember those, and started gobbling them up. So I was all excited. I won the bet. Went back to collect. They wouldn't pay me for it. It's like, oh, come on. They're like, it was a joke. I'm like, what do you mean it was a joke? I just spent... Anyway. So my wife, girlfriend at the time, she wasn't in love with her career path either. She was in music management, which meant she was a overpaid babysitter. And I was an actor, which meant I was an overpaid baby. And we both became I had a stalker that got really, really, really bad. I was never famous. I was at most like Teeny Bopper magazine, sitcom-y stuff. And I had a stalker trying to kill me. So between realizing creatively it wasn't as fulfilling as I thought it was going to be, and as it actually had been, it was a great experience. I got to travel the world, and I was never good at being a kid. So even at 8, 9 years old, if I had the drive and the professionalism and the focus to succeed in a project, I was an equal with these adults and had like this newfound family. And I lived in a small town on a farm in Maryland and then quickly transplanted to New York City. Got a Broadway show, just went on a cattle call that I wasn't even supposed to be at. Went with a friend who was auditioning. My parents gave him $40 just to get me out of the house for the weekend, and so I could see the big city. But I was bored, and it was a cattle call, meaning anyone could try out. So I just copied what the other kids are doing, and I got it. So my parents felt bad and thought, well, we got to let them have the opportunity. And they did some research, pre-Broadway stuff. Usually it's a couple months. Shows rarely make it to Broadway. If they do, it's only for a couple weeks or months. Usually they flop. And it was just a magic carpet ride that then went on from 1977 to 89. That show was Peter Pan. It ran for a year and a half. Then I got other Broadway shows from that, started doing radio, started doing TV, and fun experience. But at the end of the day, it wasn't like I was at the point in my career I was supposed to have all this creative input and control. And the projects that I loved the most would like get canceled after one airing, and the stuff that I hate is still on reruns and driving me crazy. I can't get rid of them. So we were on vacation in South Africa, wrapped up a bottle of wine, and without much intelligent forethought, SWOT analysis, or anything, we decided we're young, we're not in debt, don't have kids, let's quit our jobs, let's do our own thing. Because my dad did a career path that he didn't love. He did it because it was what he was supposed to do, and it gave him a good life. But there was something missing, like in his spirit, I think, of just being fulfilled by what he has to do every day. And you could argue we spend more time at work than we do with our families, at least in this culture. So if you're not happy doing what you do all day, you're going to be somewhat miserable human, and it's going to leak into the rest of your life. So we decided to give my hobby of restoring cars and my newfound realization that I could make money playing with the Land Cruisers I loved. So we came home, we both quit our jobs. I had 6 FJ40s and a 62, 20 grand in a piggy bank, and 3 credit cards, and a wing and a prayer, and a friend with a 1,200 square foot shop that's basically was the size of this area, but it had all the permits that we needed. And he wanted to bail, so he let me have 2 months free rent, and then it was month to month. So I just took all the cruisers in my hoard, shoved them all in there, put a Post-it note on the window, carried my old Motorola brick phone, and waited for it to ring. And I kept traveling and buying up cruisers, and immediately I realized we're onto something, because people really appreciated the FJ40s the way that we did. Now, not being the smartest guy on the planet, I immediately overcomplicated things and started taking them apart and doing full concourse, ridiculous, unjustified expense restorations to them. And then suddenly we started getting Toyota dealers calling and asking if we'd do a resto for their collection or for the showroom. Or Greg, at Toyota Iceland, is that FJ40 I built still spinning in the lobby? You didn't see it? Oh, bummer. That was a fun one. So anyway, I just kept tap dancing. And then, once we realized we're restoring and we're selling them, no one knew where to service them. And most of the Toyota dealers would be like, no, it's got a carburetor, get away. Like none of the technicians had even been there long enough to deal with it. So then we're like, oh crap, I guess we need a service department. So then we ended up with that. Then Toyota stocked less and less parts. I ended up with more inventory of the parts than the Toyota dealers did. The Toyota dealers started calling us when they needed parts. And I'm like, well, I guess we need a parts department. And it just kept spiraling. So it was like this multi-tenant, 1,200 square foot unit. And we had this one, then we blew through the wall and took over that one, and then that one. Then we had to go around that old dude to that one, and then across the hallway to that one, and then across the street to that building. And it just kept organically snowballing. And some of our early clients became our employees because they got so into their cruisers and were tinkering and playing with them. And they also were inspired by wanting to do something they felt was more fulfilling than their real job. So they bailed and joined the team, and we just kind of kept hoping we didn't trip on that treadmill and just kept going and growing and going and growing. And now I looked it up this week, I've owned just under 2,000 Land Cruisers, which is pretty stupid. And many of which I wish I had kept and cannot afford to get back. Fortunately, Greg has bought some of my all-time favorites that we've had now are part of this collection, and nice to see them preserved and somewhere safe. And it's just been an amazing, wild ride. And, when we started doing it, there was Mark's Off-Road in Burbank. What, no chuckles? No one's dealt with Mark? And beloved Marv, rest his soul, at Spectre. And Marv had no interest in getting into restoration. It's like, nope, I just want to travel and fill containers and go to Japan whenever I can and hop in my RV and go buying. And I was like 17, 18, just driving him crazy, picking his brain. And Marv and Kay were incredibly kind and open and shared a lot of knowledge with me. And Kay and I remain friends to this day, and we all, of course, miss Marv and all the precedents he set in creating such a kind community. And when I opened up the company, I was afraid I was going to offend him. So the very first thing, I went and sat down with Marv and said, look, I want to start this company. I want to start restoring and blah, blah, blah. And I'm not in the business of selling parts. I don't want to step on your toes and get in your space. I'm really going to focus on the builds. And he kindly blessed us and supported us for the rest of his life. And beyond his death, in fact, I've stayed out of selling parts predominantly out of respect to my original commitment to Marv. Also, I think selling parts is kind of boring, and I think I suck at it. I have a bad habit of over-designing, over-engineering something to the point that then the price point of that part is so stupendous that I don't want people yelling at me. So I'll just engineer it to use in my own builds. But with TLC, first 40s only and dead stock. You want a V8? Piss off. Go away. Total Gestapo about it. We're very, very picky and very stock. But I did notice over the years, the culture was changing, where some people love the archaic nature and the carburetor and the drum brakes, 3 on the tree, and that's part of the fun. And I'm that guy too for short drives. But at the same time, a much bigger audience loved the design, utility, premise, and value of the early cruisers, but had no attach and no relationship with the archaic mechanical. So as more and more perversions were coming out with the doodads and gizmos of modern automotive design, people were, I thought, starting to wane because of the driving nature of something that vintage. On the flip side, as more and more modern vehicles became something designed to last about a day longer than the lease or warranty cycle. And there was plastic everywhere, and that clarity and quality and purpose that Arakawa put into the original Land Cruisers went out the window. I mean, it's a story I don't know if any of you ever heard, but Toyota was actually asked by Microsoft, and they were doing sort of a corporate insider reveal as consultants to Microsoft. And early on in that experience, Toyota actually went, wait a minute, so those laptops, when the battery dies, you retain over 80% of your customers, but less than 5% of them are buying a new battery. They're buying the new laptop. How do you guys do that? That's interesting to us. So that was kind of the beginning of that's one of the monumental shifts in the focus of transportation design. To no longer was it about building it the best it can be to last as long as possible. Now it was about the revenue model, the repeat consumer, propping up domestic manufacturing. And now in Japan, every year your vehicle's aged, your insurance goes up, your registration goes up, the inspections get stricter and more frequent, because it's all about propping up the money. And the more disposable stuff is, the quicker we're all just going to go back and get something, which I think is asinine from if we care about the planet and really think about longevity. It's a scary, scary cultural mentality that's going to make us all go the way of the dinosaurs if we don't get our act together and correct that trajectory. And this goes back before Toyota, before any of that. I mean, Edsel, the Edsel, which is one of the biggest automotive flops in history, the Edsel was the first vehicle designed by a focus group. So you'd think they would have learned that doesn't work, but no, it became the standard in the industry. So anyway, it's been like this amazing journey, never planned. One introduction, one handshake, one connections led to another. And we've just enjoyed the ride and been maniacal about, since I was a bit of a tramp in my previous career, and so was my wife, like, okay, if we're going to start over again, let's be really clear why we're doing it and what we value and what's important to us, and protect those tenets at all costs. So with TLC, we could have done many things that would have made us great wealth or different opportunities, but it would have taken us away from that core. And same with the Icon brand, that now it's in the same building, the same main leadership, but it's like having two religions in one church between Icon and TLC. So the project managers, the parts staff, the inventory, the technicians are dedicated to each tribe independently, but then electrical engineering, mechanical engineering team, fab, CNC, machine shop, and all that, we have, of course, share all those assets together. So we were just kind of putting right along with TLC. We were feeling pretty good. We had about 15 employees. Everyone had health care. We were all making a decent living, still able to travel. Then I had kids, so they went traveling for about a decade. But one day we get a phone call, and my wife, who's not known for her customer skills, so we don't let her answer the phone much. Someone calls and wants to speak to me, and she's the gatekeeper. She's like, well, what is this about, Okay, hold, please. So we have run like Motorola radios in the shop, and she's like, there's some guy on line 3 who calls himself Mr. Toyota. All right, so I scamper back to my office to pick up the phone. Now, at this point, I didn't even know there was a Mr. Toyota. So it was like God calling the church. And I was completely floored, but trying to be cool. And he was being a little cagey. But basically what we got from the conversation is, this is ridiculous that you have this business. And it's a business? Like, you're not a rich guy with a hobby. This is like you have customers that pay you to take old Toyotas apart and put them back to, like, could not get his head around it. Like, yeah, no, it's a biz, it's okay, well, I'd like to come visit. So 3 days later, he shows up with this ridiculous entourage, and I just kind of give him the dog and pony show and take him through the shop and explain everything. And they could not get their head around that culturally we were celebrating old Toyotas, because the Japanese culture, exponentially compounded by Japanese corporate culture, you never talk about your past success. So Toyota's slogans over the years, moving forward and all of that, they mean it. So they had a real hard time looking back. And even though they internally did have great pride in their history, they just couldn't figure it out. But they were starting to want to come up with something to get that Jeep buyer. They wanted to figure out why the FJ40 still had this amazing tribal audience globally, which they didn't even realize, by the way, when they came to me. I was like, well, it's not just us crazy Americans, like Australia, Mideast, Philippines, like there's cruiser cultures, there's tribes everywhere, like it's a thing. And they literally, guys, they had no clue at all. Floored them. Unfortunately, I'd like to, well, yes, it's fair to say that they still, in my opinion, don't have a clue. I don't know if anyone follows me on Instagram. I got in a little bit of trouble a couple weeks ago because I guess I was the first to leak that they are planning on discontinuing the Land Cruiser in North America. And then Toyota's marketing manager, an old friend, calls me that following Saturday morning. He's like, dude, you're killing us. So they were just getting inundated with not happy people. And maybe it'll turn the boat, but frankly, I seriously doubt it. Toyota actually reached out after my rant and said, okay, we hear you. Could we do something with you and take the last 1,000 units and do special editions with you? I said, yes, that's great. Let's go. I said, well, what would you do? I said, okay, first thing I do, I want TM&A's marketing manager, TMS people. Let's go over to Gibraltar. Let's go to the Mideast. I want to show you guys some real Land Cruisers. And let's go look at the current series with lockers, even cable actuated lockers and vinyl interiors and rubber mats you can remove and drain plugs and you can hose it out and vinyl instead of hide of the elusive naga and reconstituted leather and wood and all this stuff. And it's like, well, why have we done that? Well, that's what the American consumer wanted. I said, no, they didn't. No, that is what they want. Our focus group said, guys, you and your focus groups. So as the conversation goes, I ended up doing a PowerPoint just saying, because I know the idea of getting these guys herding the cats to actually go with me on a trip and do a little look-see wasn't going to fly. So I reached out to a bunch of friends in the Toyota community and I had a little PowerPoint showing all these elements. Immediately, one of the lead guys, he's like, yeah, no. If we decontent the Land Cruiser the way the current Toyota system is designed, for example, if we want to pull out the refrigerated center console, it'll cost more than if we don't. If we wanted to add this, I said, no, getting into certification to stay all with certified compliant stuff, but it's their own corporate infrastructure and what they call Toyota Two-Show Group, this sort of inter-trade compound that they end up overcomplicating it. So I don't know. I don't think we'll be able to do it. But after Mr. Toyota left the shop, they called back and they explained that they wanted to do this sort of FJ revisit, and they asked if I'd build a prototype. Duh, yeah, of course I will. And they're like, do you have any ideas? I'm like, well, funny you should ask, because I've been traveling to Brazil. Already been there about 4 times, literally annoying the Brazilian Toyota dealers and banging on doors at the Toyota right in Sao Paulo, there used to be San Bernardo de Campo factory where they made the Banderantes. Now the Banderantes, think of a turtle that floated to the Galapagos and evolved for generations in that unique environment, responding to that environment. Now think of the Banderante as a 1958 FJ-25 that got sent there and evolved uniquely to that market because they never exported. Not only never exported a truck, they never even exported like a spark plug. And in like 2000, when I'm at a Toyota dealer in Brazil trying to buy parts, they don't even have a shipping department for the parts. And I'm killing, like, you could look back in the warehouse and look at like 74 and older 40 doors, NOS and wooden crates, like hundreds of them, like we can't get those. One-piece drop-down tailgates, bug catcher weather strip, like all the weird Cruiser Geeks unobtainium stuff. It's just sitting there rotting, and it was killing me. So I had already been driving Toyota crazy on a lower level in Brazil for my own antics. So when Toyota asked what I would do with the FJ, I said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We got to go to Brazil. We got to go to this factory, and I want to bring in this body style, that wheelbase. And they just started making at that time the crew cab pickup, which I forget the right BJ, or whatever they called it, which the tan one up front in the museum, we imported that body assembly, but they were building those for the military there, and it absolutely floored me. So for kind of my own, because I wanted to import all those parts anyway, but it made sense for the Toyota program. So they said, yeah, let's do that, but one thing we're going to tell you, we want it based on a taco. It's got to be built on the Tacoma platform, which is being built at Fremont, California, the old GM plant up in the Bay Area. So he said, I want you to come with me. We'll go tour that factory. Then we'll go to Brazil and we can tour that factory. We'll sit down with the president of Toyota Brazil, because they had never met. There's so many arms to the octopus. And it was amazing. Under one roof in that factory, everything but long block, short block parts and glass, everything, casting, forging, stamping, ringing, pinion gear, steering box, everything was manufactured in one plant. So while my jaw, by the way, I'm not formally trained in anything. I have no degrees. I call myself an industrial designer now because I don't know what else to say, and it's the easiest answer. And Raymond Loewy made up that term, and you don't need a degree, so I can't get in trouble. But I've just always followed my passion for design. I've always been a design and engineering geek. I'm always the guy who's like looking at the way things are made and kind of getting lost in the details. So that plant just blew my head. I'm at dinner with Mr. Toyota talking about that experience. He's at the completely opposite end of the spectrum, like, oh, it's shameful. I'm like, what do you mean shameful? He's like, oh, it's too, so it was antiquated. So they were like, oh no, this is like not good, and we're glad no one outside of Brazil even knows like this exists. It's not koshin, it's not ISO, it's ISNO. Like, it's just, but from a crafting base, it was a mind blower. So we imported. I went and bought a bunch of Tacomas from the plant the way I wanted them. I air freighted in a bunch of bodies, basically like a crew cab 45, a 43, and a 40. We took those into the shop. Toyota was incredibly cool. I think because I also was stupid cheap, because I had no idea. I'd never done an OEM concept development work at that time. So I just told them what I'd tell any client. I was just happy to have the job, and it was fun because I like to travel. I get to go to Brazil, and I get to hang out with Mr. Toyota. And we got a motorcade because there were so many banditos that like to kidnap high-powered executives, so it was kind of fun blowing through Sao Paulo in a motorcade, all armored cars. So tons of memories. But Toyota stayed completely out of our kitchen. They gave me a 5-month build schedule to build the first unit. I had to use Toyota color palettes, Toyota textiles, and a taco as the foundation. I gave them a very brief design mandate of what they were going to get. They're like, great, fine, go. And we were ahead of schedule because I was literally working probably 70-hour weeks with, 5 of us were rolling 70-hour weeks and pulling favors with any sublet supplier because we just were so excited to see it done. So we called them and said, well, come take it for a test drive. It's done. Wait, test drive? Like, yeah. Well, no, it doesn't have to drive. I'm like, what? They're like, no, just for concept. Like, oh, I don't know how to do that. No, this is analyzed. The weight balance is killer. The ABS works. Like, everything's cool. The only thing I couldn't do were the airbags. So before we had 3D printers, so we made little gel mold polymers and put SRS inserts into the steering wheels and into the dash pad. And so they were like, really? So word got back to Mr. Toyota. So instead of the babysitters coming to visit, he just showed up like, what the? So we took him out for a drive. He was totally into it. So he's like, would you do me a personal favor? Anything. Because I'd learned enough about Japanese culture at that point. If a Japanese person asks you to do them a personal favor, do it if you can, because the respect and merit in that culture is such that that is of the highest value. Could you build 2 more of them in the same time frame that you have remaining for the first one? Yeah, sure we can. So then we built the crew cab and we built the 43. Toyota took them. Forget what show it was. It may have been, did you ever hear that story? Was it the Chicago? Or I think it was Detroit. It was a Detroit auto show. So first of all, they took those 3 prototypes and then they go to CalTi, which is Southern Cal design studio for Toyota. Anyone in CalTi came out of the Art Center where I speak and work with the school. It's one of the best design schools in the world. With no disrespect to them, though, they're creating people that will comply into clear-cut silos that'll then funnel into cubicles to be compliant with corporate structures. And like this amazing designer, they'll try and almost train his personal perspective out so he's a compliant cog in the machine, and he'll do armrests until he jumps off the building one day or quits to do something more exciting. And the armrest dude will never meet the door panel dude, who will never meet the sun visor dude. So there's this disconnect. Therefore, there's not as much continuity, and in turn, therefore, personality in what they end up creating. So in the old days, for better or worse, transportation design was about differentiation, where even take Mopar. So DeSoto, Chrysler, Dodge, Plymouth, it was all the same company. It was the same suits. They'd often share platforms, but they did have the guts to let one lead designer say what that brand is going to stand for and what it's going to represent, what's important to it. Thereby, that individual's unique perspective made that vehicle unique to its Plymouth brother or its DeSoto brother. Then perversions of Wall Street, disposability, platform sharing, smarter business intellect at the cost of design and longevity. Now we end up with, you go outside and look at a black sedan, take the emblems off it. Basically, you took every new black 4-door sedan, put it in a big white warehouse, invited the general public in, give them a scorecard and say what's what, without the absurdly large grills and logos. Everything's so reactive to everything else, we'd all get a failing grade, I think. So everyone's copying everyone else. There's this disconnect, which has turned out to be a really good thing for us. But I find it frustrating because we're seeing it, right? Even in high production commoditized goods, there is starting to be differentiation in design language and mavericks that are getting success in the market, but transportation seems so slow to they're still thinking next year we're going to sell more units. Well, that's not the case with automation, with ride share, with community ownership, with better infrastructure, with urban development going the direction it's going, with autonomous vehicles. They're not going to be able to stand up at that shareholder meeting in a year even, or 2 years, and try and tell us they're going to make more next year. Those business models are going to collapse, I think, unless they rethink the core integrity of the product, creating a greater loyalty with the consumer. Until they figure it out, I'm able to build a business, albeit a small one, by being the lunatic that focuses on what we think is the optimum of what it can be, only with the support of people that are crazy enough to fund my stupid ideas. Which started with, after those prototypes for Toyota, okay? I didn't plan this, if you can tell, because I'm all over the place. That's just how I am. But at least you won't fall asleep, hopefully. So Toyota takes the 3 prototypes. We complete them on budget, ahead of time. They go to CALTI. The Toyota board votes between the 3, picks the target. The target goes to the CALTI team. They tell the CALTI team some kind of sort of referencing this. They had me do off-road trips with Toyota execs, Toyota marketing, and designers, try and reconnect them with Earth so they understood why people buy 4-wheel drives. And then the FJ Cruiser grew from that. I stayed on in design with the FJ Cruiser, but by the end of it, I think they wanted to kill me, and they would have fired me if they were paying me at that point, because I wouldn't shut up about a solid axle. I wouldn't shut up about it needed to be a convertible. I wouldn't shut up about at least the rear windows need to roll down so it's not a tomb. So I think all I can end up taking credit for in the production vehicle is the speedometer design, the triple wipers, from which I referenced the early military Land Cruisers from the Mideast. I always thought that was kind of a nifty thing. And the white grill bezel. And that's about it. But Mr. Toyota said, I really appreciate you coming through with me on that. If there's anything I can ever do for you, let me know. I said, well, actually there is. For my research, I need to be vetted and allowed into the Toyota Tusho group to be able to buy directly from global Toyota entities and gain access. Okay, like that's it? Like no deeper, no, that was it. Oh, cool. So I get the access, and they're like, anyone I talk to at any corporate division was like, who is this guy? Who gave him my name? How did he get my number? Why do we have to? He wants what? And I started importing 40-foot cargo container loads of Banderante body parts. Like again and again and again and again and again. And it was hell. Anyone ever done business in South America? Like Brazil, amazing people, beautiful women, amazing music and meat. Do not try and do business there. There's actually, in that culture, there's a job title called a despachante. So a despachante is the greaser, and he's respected more than the lawyers, the judges, the doctors, because even if you need your driver's license renewed, you either stand in line with the general populace for 10 hours to get your driver's license, or you call your despachante, and 2 hours later he comes with your license, obrigado, and you're done. So my containers were getting held hostage, basically, at the port. They were getting robbed of anything small enough to carry away. They were getting embargoed and be like, oh, we're so sorry, the wood you are using is not legal for export, but my brother, he has a crating company. And I was just hemorrhaging money, and all my stuff was getting stolen. So 5 container loads in, I figure out the politics in Brazil. We're using these parts only to complement our FJ Restos with TLC, and it was also at that point I was responding to people wanting V8s or different things, more modern performance in the powertrain. And I'd also lobbied Toyota's Marine division so I could get the I-Force V8s, because that's all I want. I don't want to put a Chevy in a Toyota. They gave me access to those. I go to pick up my first 24 units with standalone ECUs. You would have freaked out. Full turnkey crate, ready to rock I-Forces. president of TRD, where they were housing him at the time. Good guy. Jonathan, I got bad news. They just shut down Toyota Marine, and Toyota Legal got involved because of that closeout. So these aren't your motors, I'm sorry. They took hammer drills and sledgehammers and destroyed them all. There were 300 of them in the warehouse. Destroyed them all and threw them in the recycling bin because they don't want the liability. So there went me using iForce V8s. To this day, Toyota cannot get their head around a crate engine program, not to mention the ECU and electronic supports and physical adapters that are needed. But I get a lot of crap for putting LSs in, so that's the backstory of why that happens. But we're starting to tweak and do these variants, and we noticed there were even more people coming to TLC because crew cabs, long wheelbases, V8s, AC that actually worked, more precise steering. We were starting to play with coil suspension. Then Toyota destroys the plant in Sao Paulo because they were ashamed of it the whole time. So they blew it down, and what are they building, like Yaris's or something, like total robot plant, and all these people lost their job. And all these parts, I was so excited, that opened up this whole new opportunity for me. And as a designer, I was starting to really geek out on all the new probabilities we could engineer. And within 24 hours, all of that done. So in fact, Greg has my last body, which you guys will see over near where the Kid Racetrack is. That's how we were buying them from Toyota. Glass and weather strip and dash pads, primered, fully assembled. It was so sad. Then I tried reconnecting with Mr. Toyota to buy all the tooling. They had already destroyed it. They melted down all the tooling. And that was the end of the Bandeirante and what seemed like the end of the whole idea that was soon to become Icon. But I have this, I'm weird, like things will get in my head, and if they stay there long enough, probably any of you who build your own trucks, you have the same perversion, where you start to see it almost as a real 3D rotatable entity, and if you can't get it out of your head, you're going to lose your remaining sanity, right? So that's where I'd gotten with this idea. So I'm like, all right, I can't get those bodies, but there's this guy in Canada I know that's making bodies, and I could get this, I could get that, I could try that, I want to use this. So the first step for Icon was just me in a feeble effort of preserving my percentage of sanity. And it was me and one key employee nights and weekends, and I just built it because I just had to see it. And when it was done, it's like, this could work. Like, this is different. I had to create a slightly different aesthetic. Does everyone know Icon? Or enough people? So, like, we had to be careful in that we wanted it to look different enough that it wasn't trying to be different, but you went, wait a minute, why does that look different? Because the whole theology and the engineering underneath it was so different that we really wanted, in the marketing message, to be able to communicate that. But I went back on my little hand-done spreadsheet, and I added it up and what it cost to build. And then, okay, how many hours? Okay. And then labor rate at the time. Okay. And then grand total. Oh, shit. No one's going to buy this. This is not going to happen. So I was deflated. And I was like, well, it doesn't have to be Teflon coated aluminum. I guess it could be fiberglass. Ew. Doesn't have to be that. It could be drum brakes in the rear. No. It could be, and it's like all these things I could do to cut costs. The whole point of me in doing what I was trying to do was to not be that. And if I did that, I was just another one of those. And I knew I'd burn out and lose interest. And then I'd suck at it and probably become a bitter jerk. So I was talking to a friend of mine who's like a business legend. And he's always been like my one-man board of directors, this guy named Mickey Drexler, who comes from the schmata world like Gap, Banana Republic, and apparel. But he's one of those people, like he trusts his gut. He sees something and immediately it's hell yeah or F no. Like it's instinctual, it's guttural, and he trusts it. He was in town, he came to visit. I showed him the prototype, explained what I'm up to, what I'm trying. I'm like, yeah, but it's too much. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do it. Shut up. Shut up and build it. If you build it, they will come because you're passionate and you're honest in why you're doing it, and it'll read in the product. If you start trying to change it to do what you think they want or will tolerate, then you're just another schmuck. So I did. I got a small business affairs loan. I rolled the dice again because I've rolled the dice my whole life and mostly it hasn't screwed me over. And we just sat at it. We got lucky because right before it was done, Toyota was pretty much done with the FJ. It was still the PX something was the prototype. And they did the show, I think it was Detroit. They brought my 3 protos I had built for them, and they bought their production prototype. There's VIP and press day, then public. By the end of VIP day, Toyota Corporate said, get those out of here. So Toyota contacted Toyota, said, listen, I know you're excited for these to be shown to the public, and it's just not going to happen. We don't want to show them what we're not going to build and they want. It's like, okay, well, that's good news and bad news because I've been doing it the way I knew you guys weren't going to do it because of my involvement. And again, pure luck, we finished the production first Icon unit right as Toyota was launching the FJ Cruiser. So then Toyota would invite us to events to be like the sideshow. And then the media, they're going to do the big story, of course, on Toyota. And then we get a little like sidebar. And then these geeks are doing these, and they were involved in this. And boom, it just launched us. And it's just been Mr. Toad's wild ride ever since. And we've just been trying to keep up. And now Icon is much larger than TLC, maybe due to some light neglect on my half because I've built a really good master alliance of key critical people with skill sets beyond my own. If this was just me, I would have screwed this up a long time ago and long been bankrupt because I'm the thinker. I'm never done. I do 99%. I'll struggle to deliver the last 1% because to me it's never, you can't relate to anything I'm saying, right? Fellow craftsman Jeremiah. So it's just taken like me being smart enough to know I'm dumb enough to bring in a master alliance of people that can share my vision and build the brand. Thousands of FJs through TLC. The FJs through Icon. We're on Unit 196. We're on Unit 90 with our Broncos. Unit 20-something with our Thrift Masters. We're about 30-some units in, these crazy one-offs we do, which are tons of fun, called the Derelicts or the Reformers. That's a whole nother rabbit hole. That's my current favorite rabbit hole. And just living the dream from all beginning with following my appreciation for the FJ40, like wholeheartedly. Why is that built that way? And being curious and diving into it and just kind of seizing opportunities. And I highly recommend everyone quit their responsible job, follow your dream. Probably not a good time to get an FJ40 resto with all these third world rust buckets coming in with lipstick on them, impacting the market. That's a whole nother, that would have been a fun conference. Anyway, I should probably shut up. I could rant forever, but I just wanted to share my story and then open it up to questions because there's tons of stuff. If anyone's curious, I'm happy to yak on further. Yeah. So when we first launched the FJ series icons, we just did the FJ40. And I always loved the 45s. And since we only got them 63 to 67, it was a no-brainer to start doing those as well. But it was all about the 40 and the 45. Then I was doing the 43 by just stretching a 40. Not like Toyota, though, where they stretched it the cheapest way, where from my perspective in low volume, it was cost trivial. So I kept the departure angle and stretched it midship versus elongating the butt. But we were still hand to mouth, payroll to payroll to payroll. And I had this guy, I could tell he was ready to rock, but his wife was part of, like, everybody, right? Part of the buying decision as a family. And she said, no. If you can't take all three boys with you and get the hell out of the house and give me some peace on the weekends in this thing, then no. And no, that's not, no. Only if they had a four-door. And I'm like, yeah, I know we don't have a four-door. And I knew I was losing the sale. And literally while I'm on with the guy, I'm doing like a South Park quality Photoshop, cut and paste, stretch, insert, swatch, match, patch, tool, boom. Check your inbox. What about something like this? And the wife's like, yes, perfect. He's like, well, what's that? I'm like, oh, that's a FJ44. And I've been thinking about building those. And so then we used his money to develop the prototype and get the tooling and all the CAD out of the way. Now it's our number one seller. And it was as organic as trying to meet payroll, having it in my head, wanting to get it out of my head, telling that this was the guy who might say yes, or whose wife might say yes. And they're great, though. We cheat because the long wheelbase, coil suspension over leaf spring any day, obviously any 80 series owner knows that. But the wheelbase was a big cheat, and the fact that they can fit six, they're just you're going to make that many more memories. You can take that many more people and do that much more. Unless you're going up like a creek bed and then you're screwed because it's like a 20-point turn. Whereas the 40, you just goose it and pirouette and party on. Huh? That's Greg's. Yeah. Yeah, he was impatient. He wouldn't wait for me to build him one, but once I had a really good used one come in, then he was ready to rock. That happens to us a lot. No one wants to wait. We don't have any inventory because every time I try and scale operations to get that modern wealthy consumer, because our price point's stupid. They start at about $195,000. That's just the reality of building things in America, not to mention in Southern California. And if you look underneath it, and every widget is unnecessarily of high quality, and everything's machined if it can be instead of plastic and stuff. But just all the details. And I thought I was going to have to trim that back, but my friend Mickey turns out was right, way smarter than me, because the customer base that was able to afford a $110,000 icon when we started, not me, it's them that have pushed or enabled me to keep geeking out and go to the Brembo brakes, go to the better this, to the forged that, to manufacture our own consoles and our own bumpers, and really enabled us to continue that ethic versus have to keep chipping away at it. Probably won't. It probably will in markets where the terrain, the socioeconomic factors, and the politics allow for it to. You could argue there are plenty of very competent modern Toyota platforms that still speak to those ethics, right? They're just not here because this is more Wall Street, disposability, repeat consumer focused, and culturally we've allowed that to happen. that's the reality of the quality, I think. I mean, if I go look at whatever, a new Porsche GT3, and that's killer, from my world of manufacturing and low volume and craftsmanship, that's only 200 and whatever thousand. Like, how can they do that cheap? Is my weird perspective, right? Versus most consumers, like, that's asinine. I've long felt and would love to be a part of, like, to me, Willis, most people think it's Willys, but it's Willis, Willys Overland. Man, that is a brand today. What did it stand for? Simplicity, durability, longevity. So like if Toyota could do a Scion play based on even like, take a Hilux and keep all your information technology, touch screen crap that's going to go to hell in 5 years and cost more than the value of the entire vehicle. Just keep it out of it. Give me a phone dock that the dealer will support. Is my phone or my iPad or whatever pad, is that evolves? Give me a low-cost insert that's submodular. Let all the tech ride on that. My phone does better navigation than any Toyota, any Porsche, anything in any car, any way, anyhow. Get rid of all that crap. Get rid of all the content related to it. Go back to the money being spent in the longevity and the integrity, like an 80 series platform or the 70s. Decontent all that crap. And I think there is a consumer base who, okay, maybe 60 grand. But I mean, even a Ford pickup truck now, if you go to a Ford dealership and click all the boxes, you know you can leave the dealership with a $140,000 Ford pickup. So I'd argue in the 60 to 80K market, they could definitely make a business case for decontented, longer lasting, and in turn create a tribal consumer, which they're losing in droves today. Even Toyota marketing, I consulted them for years because they were confused watching Land Rover kill it in North America with crap product by milking the heritage language. JDM and TMC couldn't get their head around it. TMNA guys could. TMS guys kind of could. Talking about that, and Toyota wouldn't allow them to speak to that heritage. I'd argue 10 years ago, if they had spoken to that heritage, and God forbid, even shown a Land Cruiser in the way background in the commercials for the last 2 decades, that they've made zero effort to present or represent the Cruiser in North America, they would be selling enough units to justify being our market, thereby would be able to justify a low content level. And fine, do a Range Rover Golfer Mall Cruiser with the fridge consoles and the cooler seats and all those things those consumers want, and charge them $120 or whatever they're used to paying, and an autobiography, this or that. Party on, take their money. But stick to the ethic that defined Toyota in the world, not to mention North America, by offering us that integrity. But, you know, Arakawa, who did the cruisers that we are also attached to, earth movers, 18-wheelers, forklifts, Land Cruisers. So even back then, they were built to a different ethic, a higher standard, different standard, not fair. Yes, higher. Let's say that is fair. And it was just over the years, and Toyota eventually bought Arakawa, turned it into Araco, and brought it into their main system and ethic, and sort of brought that down as much as they could get away with, whilst UNICEF, NATO, Gibraltar, Toyota, key markets, private militias still have enough leverage in their buying power to say, no, we don't care about the wood and the gather leather. We need this, or we're going to go get a Patrol because they're half your price point and they're a competent product. It's frustrating, isn't it? So sorry. He was just asking about on my Instagram channel. I just posted the first project shot of a 6.3 liter 70 Mercedes long wheelbase or not a Pullman, but just the standard 300 long project. So these one-offs we do, the derelicts, I'll take a car with epic patina, of which there's several good examples here that I'd be more than happy to ruin. We'll laser scan it, we'll get it into CAD so I can re-engineer four-wheel independent suspension, Brembo brakes, rack and pinion, power steering, electric, gas, diesel, whatever the client wants or whatever. But we'll leave it looking like we did much of nothing and then hide the fact that it is a massively capable sleeper daily driver. So for that one, we engineered a one-off four-wheel independent chassis with a Dana 60 nodular third member, hydro-boosted six-piston Brembos all the way around, 700 horsepower dry sump blown LS9. But all this will be stuffed into what looks like your grandfather's work car, Benz sleeper, heavy patina, and it's gonna piss a lot of people off. It's super cool. So that car is 6 months in. Now that we have chassis, all the weird triangulation and bracing you saw was to maintain body rigidity because the inner fenders, wheel wells, trunk, and main floor were redesigning and recrafting. So that project I hope to have finished in about 10 months. Yeah, it's going to be a really fun one. We just at the Pebble Beach show debuted a 51 Hudson Super 6 coupe that is nasty. That one's really cool. As well as a 51 pure electric Mercury coupe. That's super cool. Then we're doing a 70, I think it is a 70, C20 derelict long bed. That's the next one coming out the chute. And then after that is the Mercedes, a 48 Rolls-Royce James Young drop head, a early Volvo station wagon, which is going to be a killer sleeper, a 35 Auburn, 653 Phaeton, and a super freak of a car, designed by Gordon Burig, who did Duesenberg, like gorgeous, magical Art Deco. And then recently, I've been jonesing for an XJ-C, so the 70s two-door coupe version of the XJ6 Jag. So I might sneak in a personal build if I can find a good one. I want to build one of those. I just fell in love with those recently. They're a great greenhouse. All right. I appreciate everyone's time. You got a question? Yes, so the question was, did Toyota consider a removable top with the FJ Cruiser? My experience is hell yes, because every prototype I built had a removable top and removable doors and a folding windshield. Every meeting I went to, I stomped my fists and stamped my heels and insisted that if they don't do that, then don't do it. And eventually, legal was concerned, which is a stupid answer. But in their defense, the first generation 4Runner to this day is a legal liability for Toyota that does not go to court, has cut checks all day, every day. They're worried about repeating that. Although the engineering and the stability control, all the answers were in place where that should have not scared them. And even the rear window was power until the last minute. And it saved like a couple pennies and a couple seconds in production, and then they got cut out. And that's when I lost my... but there were follow-up plans of a proper full Ford door. There were also plans for a convertible. There were many plans. Now, what will be very interesting to see is what happens second quarter next year with the reissue of the Ford Bronco. So I'm quite curious. I'm on the design team with Ford on that one. And there have been a lot of similarities to the experience, but I think they're going to nail it. I'm feeling really good about it. For a while, it was going sideways, but I think it's going to be really cool. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, and it's weird too. Like even at Ford, it's like NDAs like that at Ford, but they look at Jeep because it's something from which there is tons of data. They can create a reference chart, a sales track, this and that, and they can create targets. And they have a 59 cubic capacity, so we'll have 61. They did this and that, without again the huevos to respect the heritage value enough to say no. If we stick to the original ethic of that platform in a modern context, it can be different. It can do its thing, but it doesn't have to be reacting to something else in the market that they can be at a shareholder meeting or board meeting and justify their decision with historic successes of somebody else. And that's killing design. All right, everyone go pee. I'll shut up now. All right. Thanks.
All right, that was every bit as insightful as we all anticipated. So one more round of applause for Jonathan. Thanks for coming out. So I know we've all been sitting here a long time, but we have among us, we have former Sheriff Scott McKenzie, Butte County, California, the gentleman that donated the burned up FJ40 that we've seen on display. While we're all gathered, if you could just maybe take 5 minutes and share the story of that. Everybody's bladders are full, so let's not push it too much.
It's good you beat me to that truck, or I would have turned it into an icon.
Yeah, that would be a cool look. Yeah, maybe
There's enough there.
Inspiration for a future build. All right, so Sheriff McKenzie, let's give it up for Sheriff McKenzie.
Thank you.
Right into that, all right? So
Yeah,
we can hear you.
I'm good at it. Well, thank you for having me here today. Thank you, Greg. You know, I would have not known anything about this museum if it hadn't been for my daughter on social media, of which I'm not real big on. And Greg apparently found that on social media and said, I got to get a hold of that guy because he's the original owner from 1973. I had 103,000 miles on it. And am I correct so far? Close? Okay. So what happened was in the campfire, well, let me back up a little bit. I bought this rig, this FJ40, after looking at 3 different colors. And as you know, colors were fairly sparse in 1973. And I looked at that beautiful sky blue one, loved it. I looked at the light green one, kind of matches this. Loved it. It's out there. And then I looked at the hunter green, and I went to the dealership, and I said, well, which one of these can you get? And they said, well, the only one we can get for you, the only one that we have is the hunter green. I said, I'll take it. $4,200. That's what I paid for it. And up until the fire, I had every piece of original equipment that I ever had on that vehicle. I took some of it off. I had a shop and did all my own work, my own design, pretty much what you've just heard. I did everything on that myself, including power steering, the whole 9 yards. And I even had in the glove box that burned up the original window sticker and the original manual that came with it. And had not been for the fire, I would still have it and I'd still be cruising. So let me fast forward here a little bit. You probably saw on the sign out there, I call it my Tojo. I nicknamed it that for some various reasons. But as you know, the general of the Imperial Army of Japan during World War II, last name was Tojo. So I got to drive Tojo around. And it stuck. It just stuck. And it was a lot of fun. My wife and I did our honeymoon in it. We were married in 1975. Sorry. It's a lifelong love of a Land Cruiser. Sorry. I swore I wasn't going to do this. And so I bought it this month in 1973. It would have been it's 45 years old. And we've done everything in it. You name it, we've done it. It ran like a top. And as later years progressed, I realized that I had the true EMP-proof Land Cruiser. No electronic ignition, no computers, and when everything else goes to heck, I could go out there and start it, except for the day of the fire. And I tried to start it. I was going to move it out into a clearing. And we had just gotten back from a long trip, and the battery had gone down a bit, and I couldn't crank it over. And I had a choice. Am I going to burn up in this thing, or am I going to get out of here? So I jumped in my truck that still had the fifth-wheel trailer attached to it. Otherwise, I wouldn't have had time to unhook it or hook it, either way. And I drove out with the fire chasing me. I looked in the side view mirrors, and the fire was passing me. We live on a private road. Right on the edge of the canyon, of the Feather River Canyon, with 1 million acres behind us, and a fire that was moving at the speed, and it was about 60 foot tall, moving at the speed of a football field a second. And my daughter was gone. Linda got out earlier, and I figured, I had about $100,000 worth of antique firearms that burned up. And I said to myself, I don't care if I die in here, I'm going to get my dad's hunting rifle. And I did. So it was a perilous situation. I thought we had a 1 million gallon pond out back, and if I could have gotten it running, I would have just started it and run it right into the pond. Because I can clean it out later, but I couldn't do that. Wouldn't even start. So that's the story on the Land Cruiser. 45 years of sheer enjoyment. Everything I did on that, everything, including ARB air lockers, I did it all myself. I had no mechanics helping me. I came from a very good background in mechanics. My dad was a mechanic. And I had all the tools. I turned all my drive lines on my lathe. I had plasma cutters, everything. So everything you see that's there right now is what I did. And a testimony to how good Land Cruisers are built. Everything around us, including in our house, our cast iron pots and pans were welded and melted together. That has to be at least 2,800 degrees, probably more. And it was like a forge. The wind was blowing at about 130 to 140 miles an hour. The house that had plenty of fuel. The fire was 60 foot tall, and it just melted everything in the house. And look at the Land Cruiser. There were cars that were melted down to the frame. That thing is still standing. That's how tough they were in 1973. So, what's that? Well, I don't know. I'm kind of too old to be building another one. I don't know. I'm 70. I just turned 71. What am I going to do? I just called you out. And I started building this thing when I was real young. And I one more story about the Land Cruiser. When I was looking, I grew up in a hunting and fishing type of an atmosphere. My whole family hunt, fished, guns, you name it. And my dad actually had a couple of Jeeps, not CJ5s, but one was the old Willys station wagon. You remember those? And a later model Wagoneer. And I would use that and go four-wheel. I said, there's got to be something better than this. And when I got old enough to buy my own Land Cruiser or my own four-wheel drive rig, I looked and looked and looked. And I have to tell you, the people I four-wheeled with had CJ5s, and every other time there was a front frame rail breaking because they weren't framed in. And the Land Cruiser frame is all solid. You know that. You can't bend a Land Cruiser frame. So I settled on that. It was simple. It was easy to work on. And I knew doggone well that when I want to make a modification on this, I can do it in my shop. So that's what sold me on the Land Cruiser. I'm still sold on the Land Cruiser. And if my wife would let me, we just bought a new house in Chico, 8 miles away from the burn area. And I'm getting ready to build a big shop out back. And from that point on, I don't know, maybe an old Land Cruiser might land up in my driveway and I might go to work again. I don't know. Anyway, I want to thank you. It's nice sharing the story. I appreciate it. Thank you, Greg.
All right. Well, that'll bring us to a close for now. David, we got. We do have one more cool thing. Thanks for not letting me forget. So you guys have seen the truck. As you heard, it was a matter of life and death. He just grabbed what he could, his dad's hunting rifle, and tried to outrun the flames. So he had a lot of personal stuff in the car, and we, as a token of appreciation, wanted to weld some of that old junk together. So we got a horn, we got a pulley, and then we got the T-handle on the jack extension that we just thought it'd be fun. It's kind of silly, but we wanted to give you this as a memento and a token of gratitude for making that car available to the museum.
I was big on, I got to tell you this. This was part of an air horn, and I had a big air compressor on there that I took out of a Mack truck. And you know, those little cylindrical air compressors, they don't work very well. But this one worked really good. I had a switch on it. I had to cut it off at 100 pounds. It would go to 400 PSI. And I had the original button for these things. And I used to love it. You know, these little old ladies in a soft top Cadillac in Paradise, you know, the Geritol set. I'm not one of those. I'm not Geritol yet. And some of these don't even know what Geritol is. And they drive erratically, and they wouldn't take off, and they'd be on a cell phone. I'd roll up right behind them and whoa! And they just about jump out of their seat and they take off. That had more fun than most anything in that Land Cruiser. Thank you, Greg. I appreciate it.
Okay, so the next thing on the agenda is a tour with David of the museum at 3 o'clock, and the next skills workshop is outside at 3:30 or in here? Outside at 3:30. So enjoy until then. Thank you.
Thanks, I appreciate that. This is kind of a mounting point, so you can hang it on the wall or just stand it up. I think if you lean it on the belly, you can do that too.
Oh, yeah.
I'm from Reading.
Oh, you are?
Sorry to hear about that.